Hello and welcome to Faith and Marriage Today. It's great to be back in the studio with the full crew, and it's great to have Dr. Mario here and Dr. Sarah Denny back to continue our conversation.
Yeah, we're happy to have her. So if you missed the first episode, please check us out on YouTube, where you can see that full episode as we dive into this wonderful conversation that Sarah has about John Paul II and Margaret Sanger getting cozy with a cup of tea and talking about deep philosophical things of what does it mean to be free and what does it mean to love and what is the context of those things. And so we had this wonderful conversation in this first episode to be able to define that so we can see that these ideas have ramifications. Good ideas will lead to good behaviors, and bad ideas will lead in other directions as well. And so what we're seeing in our culture, as Sarah so beautifully articulated, is that many of the ideas that Margaret Sanger purported 100 years ago at this point have now really found root in our culture today. And so we're seeing a lot of different effects to that. One quote here from Edith Stein that I think you've spoken about beautifully. It says, "The world doesn't need what women have, it needs what women are." So this question of what women are, that means that there's some sort of defining characteristic, there's some objectivity, object truth, some essence of what women is, not just who they are, not just behaviorally speaking to them. So when we speak about what women are in a sort of authentic femininity, what is that? And how do we wrap our brains around that? And if there is an authentic femininity, then we have to ask, is there an inauthentic one? And what does that look like also?
Yeah, so, what I start all of my Christian ethics classes with is this understanding, which is John Paul II again, what he is moving towards always in his teachings is integration. And he talks about the fact that, we always want to talk about what are we allowed to do, like, especially for high school, like how far is too far, all these kinds of things. And his point is that we can't know what man ought to do until we know who man is. Right? We have to start with the essence, philosophically speaking, or the heart of what it means to be human. And so, this quote from Edith Stein, it's always given me a lot of just encouragement, and that is the inspiration for the website. Fun story, I was watching the first Women's March when it happened, I'm not sure, 6 or 7 years ago, and I was in a coffee shop, and I got so fired up that I wanted to do something about it, so I bought the domain for whatwomenare.com.
Awesome.
Wow.
I was like, I don't know what else to do, so I'm gonna buy this domain, and then I posted once a year. Anyway, but because that quote was such an inspiration to me about, it's, I'm always seeing a lot of us, as adults, we usually, I meet someone at a party, it's like, oh, what do you do? And you're trying to find something to talk about, but I can't encapsulate the entirety of this person, and what they do. There's, each of us sitting at this table, there's so much more depth to who we are, and it would require time and the ability to sit with each other and really kind of delve into that, which is a beautiful thing. But even from up front, just very simply, I can take a step back and say, okay, so what does it mean to be a woman? And I don't claim to know everything, because I definitely do not, but what I've learned, and interestingly enough, from John Paul II, but also from a lot of women I'm blessed to know in my own life, also grateful as a Catholic woman to have Our Lady. I mean, you can't really get much better than that. But there's such, I would say, a tenderness and also a ferocity, like a fierceness to womanhood. And I think usually in the culture we're trying to go back against one or the other, and again, integration, what's the ways that we can bring these visions together. And I think to start, if we're going to talk about who man is or who woman is, first we talk about the fact that she's human. So what does it mean to be human? What makes me different than an animal? And the difference is my capacity to know, to choose, to love, right? Very simple, very basic, but still, sometimes I think we forget the basic stuff, and that's why we can get so confused. So in my capacity to know, to choose, to love, I also know that my vocation, our vocation as human beings and as women, is to love and to be loved. And if I want to love and be loved, then what that requires of me is I can just go out and do that, with whomever I meet, however I want. And that we would refer to as this sort of understanding of license, where I can do anything I want, it doesn't really matter, and there's no consequences. Or what we know, through philosophy, even before we get to Christian ethics, so that confirms it, right, is that, like you said, ideas have consequences. That was John Paul II's whole thing. And this is a man who, lived through World War II, then saw Russia come in after World War II ended. So he wasn't immune to pain and suffering, like most saints are not, right? And what he saw was, I can't just walk around and say these ideas and then expect there to be nothing that comes after it. And if my ideas of the human person, of womanhood, is so subjective that every single one of us can define it, and there is no objective truth, then it leads to not only confusion, but it can be very dangerous. And I would even argue at a certain point, it gets destructive.
Sure.
Right?
That's where we're at right now.
And so I think, and exactly, so that's where we are. It seems simplistic, but I think the easiest way to describe it, and I'm sure y'all have talked about this on the show, right, is that identity piece, And so when I teach women, I say there's two parts. Again, the integration, it's your body and your soul. So I'm going to educate you, I educate you on both. And right now, I would say to start that identity piece, it's the spiritually speaking is from the moment of your conception, your daughter. And even when we lose our parents, we remain daughter, and most importantly, we're daughter of the Father, And then as I grow and I mature, you start to build friendships, and there's this, biologically you have sisters perhaps, but also spiritually there's this sisterhood that develops. And then as you continue to grow and mature, there's this bride imagery, right, that I'm called to give a gift of myself, and then that gift can be so real, right, in a physical sense that I give it a name, it's a baby, I'm mother, but also spiritually, like my students, if I'm imparting truth and life and the gift of what truth is, which I think is life-giving, to my students, then I'm giving them something, right? But I'm not losing,
Yes.
I'm gaining.
Yeah.
I'm also learning from them, but I'm gaining because that's what life begets life, And so then there's this motherhood piece. But the gift of that is that's also not this one box that we have to jump into. And I think Sister Prudence Allen, she does this well, but she talks a lot about integral sex complementarity. And I remember in grad school that was really good for me to encounter because I grew up playing sports my whole life. So when some of my friends were so worried about makeup and which clothes they were going to wear, I was at travel softball tournaments and was not worried about that. I'm shoot, I just messed up that play, or did I get that bunt, whatever. And so it was, again, I think that's why John Paul II's vision was such a relief to me, because it's not the superficial, I don't mean that in a bad way, but the external things that define me. Those, I can reveal myself through those external things. Again, I tell my students, I'm makeup's not bad, getting dressed up's not bad, it reveals who you are. I said, but it doesn't define who you are. And there's a difference between I reveal myself to the world through these things versus in my very essence, who am I? And the vision of authentic femininity is that, woman typically, philosophically perhaps, we would express tenderness to be more of a feminine virtue and then courage to be more of a masculine virtue. But that doesn't mean that a woman who is courageous is somehow masculine, or a man who is tender, right? And JP2 talked about men being tender. So it doesn't mean that they're feminine. It's that no matter how I live that virtue, I live it in and through my personhood, which involves my body, which reveals me to myself in its own way, right? So if I live courage, I'm living it in a feminine way because I am a woman, and if you live tenderness, you're living it in a masculine way because you are a man. And I think, unfortunately, I don't feel like that's kind of been understood recently.
We've obliterated those. And so what you were saying
Yes.
earlier, which is beautiful, is that this notion that in fear of this box, that we would say what women are, and I think sometimes that question's hard because we say, well, there's an objective truth, and that means then there's this box.
Right.
And this box is what I'm supposed to conform to. And rightfully so, there's been a rejection of that box. And so even John Paul II, when he talks about in the theology of the body, he's not defining gender roles. He's not saying men must work and pay the bills, or women must do this and this. He's not laying out clear directives, which sometimes even in our Christian circles we can fall into, where it's it must, masculinity must look this way, or femininity must look this way. And these become overly rigid and confining and lacking of freedom. And so when feminists look at that, they rightfully reject that and say, well, that's not right.
Yeah.
The problem is that we've gone too far to the other extreme, which is, as you said, that if there is nothing that holds it together, there's no ideal, there's no fundamental truth that's present, then what ends up happening, as you stated, is that we end up becoming isolated and individual. And so if we become individual and my truth is only what exists, well, if that's the case, then how can you even have any shared relationship?
Yeah.
If I am my own universe within myself, then I'm totally isolated from the rest of the human race, because there's fundamentally nothing that I share with anybody else. Now, nobody would say that outright, but you follow those philosophies to their conclusion, that's where it leads you. And so what's the outcome of that? Well, goodness gracious, we can look at all the studies of young people, particularly young women, having higher rates of anxiety, higher rates of suicidality than ever before in human history. Where before it used to be the people who committed or even attempted the most suicide were elderly men, but now what we're seeing is particularly teenage women, 57% or something like that is what the latest studies show, having levels of anxiety and depression. Almost 30%, I think, at this point, have all admitted to having some type of suicidal ideation. Why? When we talk about ideas having consequences, those are the consequences. When you say that life isn't meaningful, that there's no fundamental fundamental truth that there's no purpose to your experience, then what else do you have? You have nothing to hold your life on.
Yeah.
And that's why people are depressed. It's like, this has real consequences. So it doesn't mean that we have to go back to putting people in a box or saying this is what it's supposed to be. No, but it's at least to say we have some movement. We have something that we're trying to orient our lives towards. And we can do that in a unique way as men and as women, and not obliterate the fundamental truth that does exist between us.
Yeah. And I think, one of the beautiful things about John Paul II is I think he's so aware of the reality of life, which is sometimes that life is very difficult. And so I think, what we've seen, and you had mentioned, and I appreciated that, was that it's not just, these people out there are sometimes, they're just obliterating these roles. It's also that sometimes even in the Christian sphere, they're holding so tightly to the roles that sometimes I want to look at them and be like, stop, please. People think this is what we're teaching, and it's not,
at all.
And I think it's out of, as always, it's out of a fear, of change or of losing the essential values that we know to be very important for society and for the family to continue to move forward. But I think always it's that call out of fear, right, into in my reality, right? So there are some families where, and this is why John Paul II thanked women who work, is A, he thought they have so much to offer the world, but B, he's also aware of the fact that some families can't afford for the woman to not work. And, he's all about protecting the potential for if a woman could have the opportunity at certain points of her children's life to be more present, but he never does it in such a way that it's just like, again, like you said, it's that boxing in and pushing away. And I think what's interesting right now, because I completely agree with those statistics, because I've seen them in my students, especially my high school students, but also my college students, is that they're so, in a sense, obsessed with it. And I can't even say that they woke up one day and they chose to be obsessed with it, right? It's that they're swimming in it. It's like someone, when we give them cell phones, right, we're giving them literally the world. I can go anywhere on my phone. And they kind of are thrown into the deep end, and then they're like trying to like splash around and figure it out. And sometimes they feel like they can come up and get air, and then sometimes they're going back down into it. And I think it's hard for them because they just don't have the coping mechanisms yet to even figure out what to do with all those feelings. And there's a lot of feelings. When a young woman sees a post, it could be anything. It could be, maybe she's following someone who's an actress. She can have 5 million thoughts. Usually it's going to be comparison. Comparison's probably going to lead to some kind of despair, but it could be her best friend. There could also be a space for comparison, or they're afraid that they're missing out on something, or they feel like they measure their value and their worth by how many likes they get on a post. And I think for parents, like I'm blessed and grateful. I remember when I was a senior in high school, I had a pink Razor phone. I thought it was so cool.
That was awesome.
So cool. And I had
so
the
cool.
snake game. Like that was the extent of my experience, So I remember life without social media up till when I was in college. Like a friend of mine made a Facebook for me because I could have cared less. And she's like, oh, I made you a Facebook. I was like, okay, great, And I would see pictures of our friends' events or whatever, and it was wonderful. But when I realized that my first year out of college I was teaching and all my 8th graders would stalk me on Facebook, and I was like, this is weird, you guys, but just realizing that for them, they don't know a world outside of it. So like all of us usually that are having this conversation in a lot of ways, we have had the gift of not having to have had to order that as young people. And so I really feel like it's a very new experience for them, that it's very hard. We can't even box that experience in because it's so, this is when their psyche is developing, their emotions are developing, they're going through puberty, there's so much happening. And I would say the best word to describe it is it's extremely intense, and so that's why it demands patience, but patience is long suffering, and for all you parents out there, that's very hard, and I really do believe it is long suffering because you can't, I know so many parents that I think when you see let's say you see your daughter do this scrolling thing and you see her whole demeanor changes. Like 5 seconds ago, she might have been so excited about the day, and now she's just you can't get her out of herself, And I know that it's so difficult, but like we talked about last episode, don't give up on your kids. And then the other thing I would say is just a consideration. I think it's almost ironic that in our attempt to be so connected, we're so much more isolated, and which is why we go to restaurants and
people are just sitting there with their phones and not even talking to one another.
And I think you used to sit in a doctor's office and maybe I might enjoy this more than other people. I'm like, hi, how are you? What's your name? Not everyone wants to do that. That's fine, but at least we were almost forced to be social before. Whereas now, I mean, what does someone do when they're uncomfortable? They're gonna pull out their phone, you know? And that's myself included, all of us. You know, we have moments, or I'm just like, I'm tired, like I don't wanna have a conversation. So again, it's not like this evil thing, it's bad, but it's each of our responsibility.
Yep.
And this is what I bring to my students all the time is whatever gift we have, is it my God or am I the master of it? You know, and that's always the struggle, is who's in charge.
Well,
You know?
Sarah, everything you're saying, I mean, I'm a mom. I'm seeing it in ministry. I'm seeing it whether they're in high school or in college. How would you encourage parents to really open the line of communication with their teenagers about the danger that's happening with that little thing in their hands?
Yeah, well, and I say this very humbly because I don't have kids yet at this point in my life, but my first recommendation would be that the parents have to put the phone down themselves.
Oh, yes.
Like, I see a lot of parents who want to say good things, but I'm like, that was your moment. I can see the child looking for your attention, and the phone was in your hand. And it may be very important things that the parents are doing, right? But for the child, no matter how old they are, right? This could be a 17-year-old child. So they seem mature, they're developing, but just remember, emotionally, there's still a lot going on, you know? And they want your presence, right? And so number one is for the parents. And whatever that means, that's each parent has to, like, that's not something any of us could judge, because it's each parent has a unique situation that they're in. But maybe there's just like, you know, I love the families that do the dinner where it's like a technology-free zone, you know, which we do that for the March for Life. We make all the kids, they put their cell phones down, there's certain times. And there has to be, again, I would encourage, it can't be this super tight line that's so taut that it could just like snap, you know, because they're kids, this is their real lives, this is their reality. And if you become super intense with your grasp, they can just go to so-and-so's house and they're gonna be like, you know, and they're always gonna compare. I'm sure so many of you, as you try to be a good parent, you feel like the bad cop half the time. But what I would say is, once you have that space where you can even admit, hey, like, and that's the thing, is if you go to conversations with humility, like, I understand this is really hard. And sometimes it means the parent saying, I'm really sorry that I wasn't focused or paying attention to you when this happened. You didn't deserve that. And even that, because what the kids start to do is they build up walls. And even if they didn't have walls built up, it's just for the parents to know, it's not you. It's like, you're the parent. When I was a teenager, if my mom told me something, even still to this day, you know, if my mom tells me something, I'm like, no. And then someone else does it and you're like, yeah, you know, I'm like, shoot, sorry, Mom. And when I would teach high school, I would tell the girls, I'm like, you know what you can give up for lunch? Like, I don't know what I should give up. I'm like, I bet you this would be really hard. And they're like, what? I'm like, well, how about you give up talking back to your mom after school when she asks you how the day went? And they're like, no, we can't do that, that's too hard. And I'm like, okay, so now you see, like, so it's not just on the parents though, like it's a both and for some of you, I do want to let you know, you may be doing everything right and your child still does not want to talk to you.
Correct.
And in that place, that's where the fact that we are sitting here with an understanding of that God exists, like, this is so hard. I think the hardest thing in life is this deep, like, ultimate surrender. Like, Jesus, I surrender this to you, take care of everything. I'm like, but I really, could you and he's like, okay, wait, what I said was take care of everything. And like, do we trust that the Holy Spirit is still about his business, even in our children's lives, which sometimes and oftentimes is out of, there's certain things we can control and there's certain things we can't, but never doubt the power of your prayers and of your sacrifice, right? That this space of fasting, this space of just offering up like little things that you can do for them. And it might even be something, like I remember one of my friends telling me about her sister who had really struggled with, you know, either it was drinking or something like that, like a little bit too soon. And so one of the parents said, okay, you know what? Like, I'm not gonna drink until you can drink. So they like did it together, you know? And it was like something really beautiful. And it, you know, of course the kid originally was like, no, you know, but it changes. And I think that's it, is you have a really beautiful creative sphere that also for the parents, the temptation, don't compare your parenthood to other people's parenthood. Like, as adults, we can also get stuck in comparison. I think that's to the end of our lives, it's a struggle. But usually the enemy sets up comparison in front of us and it's so annoying because he's not really creative and he just picks the same cards, you know.
It still works.
Right, it still works every time. And you feel like you push past this thing and then like, boom, this other little mushroom pops up. You're like, you know. But to not give up, because the enemy wants to distract you from the gift of what is. And he also wants to distract us with the lie that it will always be this way and it will never change. And that's not from the Lord, you know.
I'm just thinking about some of so this is obviously impacting just the way that the culture's going with all this and the lies against women, and there's some real challenges that are out there, and families are really facing some really difficult things. I know we talked about depression, anxiety, all of that, and then parents kind of feeling lost in being able to like speak to them and address the challenges that are ahead. So I want to maybe speak more again about like, you know, things that we can talk to our children about. But what if, I mean, we're in an environment where identity is so lost, and we've lost who God is. We've lost the identity of what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman, and then people are struggling with gender dysphoria, or thinking that they are a boy, but then they think they're a girl, or they are a girl and they think they're a boy. Could you speak into some of that, and just how do we navigate those conversations as parents, as schools, as community, to really help be there for people who are in those situations? Yeah,
I mean, and I clearly do not claim to know everything on this topic. I think it's a very humbling topic because it's so real and it's so personal, right, to so many people. I think the best way, though, is it's kind of echoing what we've been talking about this show and the last show, is that place of encounter, is that the first thing that we can offer is to listen. You know, I think it's always going to be a temptation, especially I think there are parents who they didn't, you know, quote, see this coming, and they feel completely lost at what to do. And just to remember that as a parent, there's so much going on in your child's life. There's so many sources and things that are coming at them, that to be careful in your own emotional experience of it, which is valid and real and you should be feeling, is to do your best to not only be reacting to the child, you know, like where you can react in anger. And it doesn't mean you can't feel those things, but to really, and then maybe even when you do feel that and you do react in that, to actually apologize to your child, like, I'm so sorry I was angry. I'm trying to understand what's going on. Like, why do you feel this way, or what's happening that you feel that you need this? And I think, you know, what I've seen is that a lot of Christian parents, Catholic parents specifically too, is I've known some amazing parents and their kids are crazy, and I've known some crazy parents and their kids are great. And like, I think the thing is, like, we can all remember too is, you know, like, we're here on this show and we get to like show up and look our best and it's awesome, but like, all of us have real lives, you know, and life is also super messy. And there are things that I think you as a parent are holding that you can't even put words to. And I think of St. Monica's prayer so often, like, to not doubt the power of your prayers in that. But there's no just like one size fits all answer for this, because then each child is so unique. It could be any number of reasons why the child has come to that point. And the temptation again will be to look back and say, what did I do wrong? How did I mess up? And that's always a distraction. Yes, you can learn from that, but to not get stuck there and to say, okay, today, this is what happened. How can I talk to my child? And if my child does not want to talk to me, who do I trust that's going to be able to let the child have a safe space that they can go talk to that person? You know, but like anything else with parenthood, usually when the parent is correcting the child, if all my friends are doing it, which again, this comes back to a space of wanting to belong. You know, like yesterday I was actually speaking at the Catholic Center at Tulane University, and Tulane had Sex Week. I didn't even know they did that, but they have Sex Week. And it's all about sex positive encouragement and transgender and knowing your body and a lot of things. And I was just thinking, you know, for me it was a crazy full circle, because that's where I took my women's studies class, so I'm able to go back and just to kind of like offer what I've learned since. But then also this place of, I was telling them, it's like, it's not us versus them. Right? It's not that like they don't know anything and I know everything. And so I think, you know, where sin abounds, grace abounds all the more, and not in the sense of even that the child is in a place of sin with this, but more so that confidence of running to the Father to say, Lord, I have no idea what to do, and knowing that it's okay if you feel lost, because there are very few people that I feel like are equipped, you know what I'm saying, to even be able to respond with you. And we're learning a lot as we go, but I feel like you, Dr. Mario, like you would even know. I mean, I feel like in the specific situations, if I have young women come to me, we talk about it my way. You know, I don't think there's one way, and I don't want to step outside my lane too far, but my way is, you know, because my shtick is formation, you know, and for me, I think there's such an empowerment in this reality of what the culture is. Only 3% of women know about the reality of their cycle and when they ovulate. 3% worldwide. Okay,
that's incredible.
So when I feel called to educate young women on their bodies and on their fertility, I'm also like, we think women know that. They don't know that. We live in a first world country, but we don't know how our own bodies work, you know. And so I think giving them the gift of knowledge about themselves, right? It's that you empower people through this self-knowledge, and that self-knowledge can lead to, I can't accept myself if I don't know who the heck I am. And it's not, again, it's not the only solution, but I do think there's power to even educating young people in the reality of their biology, their sexual arousal, attraction, desire, like, because I think for so long, and this is why I love Love and Responsibility. I'm like, everyone read it. I know, but read it anyway. But it's because I think it's very practical. And in there, John Paul II is saying, again, just as I'm not defined by my emotions, I'm not defined by my attractions. Like, I still have this capacity to choose within it. But unless someone educates me in that potential, unless someone educates me that that tension is not my choice, that tension's my experience of this choice I'm going to make, then they just feel, honestly, they feel controlled by it. And what I've seen for a lot of young women is this like experimentation.
Right.
And they don't realize that if you experiment physically, girl, guy, whomever, your body will have responses.
Correct.
And so then they feel like this means I'm X, you know, and then they just spiral. And there's so much fear and there's so much shame and they don't, they just feel so lost, you know.
Sarah, we have so much more that we could discuss with you. We are coming up to the end of our time soon, but I think there have been two main things that have stood out to me between the last show and this one. And one is the importance of education and knowledge and truth. And the second thing is the importance of communication. Like, as a mom whose, you know, oldest is 24, I can tell you, when I in humility say to my son, I made a mistake, or I don't understand, let's talk about it, that just is like a wellspring that blows the door open. So you are so gifted with wisdom as one who has not given birth at this moment, but you are saying truth that we need to communicate with our kids. Because it goes far. Dr. Mario, would you say? Yes, that's so much.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, we're out of time, but yeah, absolutely, 100%. Yes, we need to talk, we need to listen, we need to be humble. We 100% agreed on all of that.
I think we have a lot more that we can discuss. Jason, I think we have some more planning to do, don't you?
Dr. Sarah, please make your schedule available for the next series of Faith and Marriage Today. We'd love to have you back. Thank you again for all that you're doing and for the great work. And the website again, tell us.
So the website is whatwomenare.com, based off of that Edith Stein quote. And on it you can find, it's very basic right now, but I'm hoping to post a bunch of the podcast interviews I've done. And I would love to create some resources for parents and how to talk to your kids about their changing bodies. So stay posted. And
going to different schools to teach, do you present on topics
so I
at
present at parishes, at grammar schools, at high schools, at universities, wherever and whenever I am. That's my favorite thing. That's what I'm most passionate about is sharing that.
We are going to have you back soon. That's all the time we have. Dr. Sarah Denny, thank you so much for being with us. We really appreciate you and all the work that you're doing. To learn more about Dr. Sarah Denny or her work, please check out her website, whatwomenare.com.
Again, that wraps up our show for today, but please, please, please check out our previous episodes of Faith and Marriage Today on YouTube. Follow us on Instagram, like us on Facebook. We're not on Snapchat or TikTok. No cool dances from me. Jason can dance, but I can't. So, but even I'd love to be part of the conversation on social media, or just check us out at faithandmarriage.org.
Thanks so much for watching. Until then, next time, God bless. Sorry, you got me on the dance.